Birria. Hello everyone and welcome back to my kitchen. The next page in our taco manual is birria. Yes, birria. It's really having a moment here in the United States, though it has been a super popular taco filling and entree in Mexico for, shall we say, centuries. Now, in Mexico, it is often made with different kinds of meat. Where it's the most famous, which is West Central Mexico, Guadalajara, and around in that area, it is typically made either with goat or with lamb. And I have that right here in front of me. This piece of goat meat here is part of the leg meat. This lamb is a lamb shoulder roast. You want to get the ones with the bones in, if at all possible. Now you may be asking, where could I find goat, that very common thing in Mexico? Well, you would look in a Mexican grocery store or in a Middle Eastern grocery store. Oftentimes you will find goat there as well. What does goat taste like if you haven't ever had it? I always say it tastes a little bit like a cross between pork and lamb. So it's a little richer in flavor than lamb is and a little more succulent if you get a small lamb. Now, in other parts of Mexico, especially in the north, they will make birria out of beef. So I have a piece of chuck here, a piece of chuck with, if you can get it, with the bones in it. But I will tell you that if you want to have the absolute most luxurious birria that you have ever had or could ever have, then I would use short rib. So get a big chunk of short rib and use that. You're always looking for someplace around 4 pounds. If it doesn't have bones, around 3 pounds for the recipe that I'm going to show you. What is birria made into a taco? Well, it is the meat that is slow simmered in a light red chili sauce, and then you take the meat out and brown it up a little bit, and you dash it with some of that delicious juice. And almost always when you get a birria taco, you will get a little cup of the braising juices on the side, which just makes everybody absolutely happy. You dip it in there and it's just absolutely delicious. Quesabirria, well, that's a topic for another time. Okay, so what do you have to do to turn these pieces of meat into birria? Well, first you got to make a marinade. I'm going to make this birria marinade from guajillo chilies. So it's a smooth skinned chili and it has a sort of cranberry red color to it. You want to choose ones that have this really dark cranberry color to them because they're going to be the most flavorful. Of course, you have to process through them all by taking the stem end off. And then I just use my finger. Some people like to use scissors to do it, but it slows me down too much. So I just use my finger to tear open the side of it. Now, when you do open it up, you'll see that some of the seeds will be still attached to the seed pod and veins. So you want to kind of pull those out and then shake out all of the seeds here. And then I always tear them into large pieces, flat pieces. That's going to make this whole thing go really fast. So I've already done all the rest of the chilies here, and we're going to go over to I have a griddle going here. You'll probably want to use like a large 12-inch skillet for this kind of thing if you don't have a double burner griddle like this one. But we need to toast these. Their flavor is so enhanced if you toast them. And what I like to do is to spread them into a single layer on the griddle For even toasting, I know not everybody does this, but for even toasting, I will say I like to just press them down. This is the reason that I like to work with them in flat pieces, because this goes so incredibly well. And as they start to toast, they will change color slightly. On the inside, you will notice that they start to actually lighten up in color. If you can see this, how much lighter it is on this section, that is the color that we're looking for. And as they toast and lighten up in color, they will also release a lot of their aroma into the kitchen. So I'm going to press this down. My griddle is always much cooler on one end than it is in the middle. So now I moved everything back to the center where it's way warmer, way hotter, so that I can then do this toasting a little bit faster. I use my nose for this a lot, and when I really smell the aroma of the chilies released, I know that they are getting really close. But they also change color, as I showed you just a moment ago. You'll notice that on the back here of my griddle, I have some whole cloves of garlic, but they're whole cloves of garlic that are in their papery skins, and I am roasting those there. You could do that alongside the chilies as you're working here. They'll take about 15 minutes to get completely soft. Soft is what you're looking for here, and they will probably get little black spots on them in places. So as I'm working through this here, I will meet you back when I've got them all toasted and we're ready to rehydrate them. These chilies just smell so good. Just hot tap water is, to me, the best way to rehydrate them. Some people boil them, but I think it takes too much of their flavor away. When I get enough of the hot tap water here so that they float freely, I'm going to put a plate on top of them just so that it keeps them submerged here, and they will rehydrate evenly. I'm going to let them go for about 20 minutes. Okay, the garlic has cooled off enough that I can handle it here, and I am peeling the papery skin off of that. That will go into this blender jar here. I'll collect all of that there. We have now our rehydrated dried chilies, which are really the star of the show for this marinade. And I'm going to put all of them into this blender jar as well. Just pick them up and slide them in here. Now, one thing that you do have to know is that the guajillo chili, while it has a really bright flavor and very mild heat, does have a very tough skin. So I'm using a high-speed blender here, a Vitamix. If you don't have a high-speed blender, you will probably want to strain this mixture after you blend it, just because those skins are really tough. So I measured 1 cup of the soaking liquid for the chilies, and now I'm going to put the spices in here. About a teaspoon of Mexican oregano will go in, and I have cumin and black pepper. Mexican oregano, cumin, and black pepper are sort of a triumvirate that you see in a lot of recipes, especially ones that are red chili sauces in that west central section of Mexico. I always keep a small molcajete, that's the lava rock grinding stone from Mexico. I keep a small one right beside my stove so that I can crush spices right before I use them so that they're the most flavorful. Once I get them started, it's the black pepper that you have to kind of go in there and get started by crushing it. Then I do a circular motion to actually turn it into a real powder here. And boy, that aroma is really dynamic as well. So the black pepper and cumin will go in. I always keep a little brush by my molcajete there so that I can use that to get that out. Okay, now we've got 3 tablespoons of vinegar. I'm using an apple cider vinegar. And then I'm going to put in a real big, generous teaspoon of salt. This recipe is going to get more salt as we go along because that wouldn't be enough for all of the meat that we're using. But this will get us started in the flavoring of the marinade itself. So now comes the blending. You always want to do this on high, and you want to do it until you can feel this sauce between your fingers and notice that most all of the chili skin has been blended smooth. A lot of noise there. You can see that it's actually heated up by the blades of the blender there. So I'm putting all of this over the piece of lamb that I'm using here, that lamb shoulder roast that I showed you before. So that just goes all over this. And I'm going to, it covered it really beautifully, but I'm going to add now 4 cups of water. And I'm going to pour that sort of around the outside of this. And the technique for cooking that I'm going to show you is the braising technique. So usually when you're braising things, it will be about half submerged. The meat will be about half submerged, and that's kind of what we've got here. I'm going to put the top on this. You want to do this like in a large Dutch oven. Something heavy is the best piece of equipment for this kind of thing. But if you're a slow cooker person, hey, do it in a slow cooker. You will reduce the water to 1 cup, okay, because there's not as much evaporation in that. This has 4 cups in it. I've set my oven to 325 degrees. So I'm gonna slide this in here and I'm gonna cook it for about 3 hours. After 2.5 hours, I'll go in and check it and make sure that not too much of the liquid has simmered away. This is the moment that you always wait for, of course, because you pull it out, you take the top off of it. If you've been cooking this in a slow cooker, of course, it's already filled the house with that delicious aroma for hours and hours and hours. So let's see what we've got here. I took a peek earlier just to make sure that it had the right amount of liquid around in it. So look at that. Well, it is incredibly aromatic. Now I am going to take the meat out of here first. And remember that it will probably come out in big chunks, which we will then sort of break into smaller pieces. But we want to work on this braising liquid now. So we've got the big pieces of the meat out. Now I need some fat for this. So I'm actually going to pull a ladle up here and tip this up on the side and then collect all the fat off the top. So you don't want to be doing this with a really lean cut. That's why I'm always choosing to use something like a shoulder roast because there's usually a fair amount of fat. And remember, I did not encourage you to cut any of the fat off of this. But now we're going to degrease this broth because we're going to use the fat both to brown some of this meat up right before we serve it and also to kind of crisp some tortillas. This is a very standard part of making really good birria. I need to measure and see how much of this braising liquid we actually have to work with here. So I'm going to pour this into a measuring cup because I need about 2 cups of it. Let's see what we've got. Well, looks like I hit exactly 2 cups. If it was more than that, I would encourage you to boil it down until you reach that concentration, that 2 cup concentration. But here I'm going to just simply put it on a very low heat so that it is hot when we want to serve it. Now our next step here, and all of this, by the way, can be done well in advance of your serving. So I always suggest to people that they get their birria made, get the meat off of the bones, work through, like I've got a lot of little bones here that I'm pulling out. And then you just look at how incredibly tender that meat is. It just falls into large and coarse shreds. There's a little bit more I can get off of that, but mostly that is just bone there. Let's look over here in this piece. So you'll see that this is going to come off and let this bone come out in one great big piece. And I think that's going to be kind of what we want to look at there. I can use a knife on a lot of these bigger pieces to help me cut them into large shreds, but just a couple of these pieces like that. So you'll see what I'm going to do here. I'm going to use my knife more as a shredding device like that, but everything that's small you'll be able to just tear up with a pair of tongs. See, look at how beautiful that exterior piece of the birria is. Okay, that is just very, very beautifully shredding on its own there. Okay, now I have a large skillet that is on the back here. This is best done with a non-stick skillet or a well-seasoned cast iron skillet, if that's what you have access to. But I have it here on about a medium-high heat. And my next step is going to be to take some of this fat, just a little bit of this fat. That was a little bit of the braising juices there, so I got a little bit more than just the fat. And now I'm going to put the meat in here so I can start to crisp it a little bit. If you've been to a birria, you notice that a lot of them don't do this step, but my favorite ones are the ones that brown the meat a little bit before they make tacos for you. So that's my standard way of doing it. Browned meat always, to me, has more flavor. So we'll just let this crisp up for a minute or two here, and then we're ready to start making tacos. I'm going to give a little seasoning to our broth here. If it looks thick, thin it out a little bit, because this should be like a consomme, is what they would call it in Mexico, or a broth. Let me just stir that in and give it a taste. See where we are. It'd be great for dipping these little birria tacos. So I've got tortillas here, and I am going to show you the sort of standard technique. Now, lots of taquerias will heat their tortillas by dipping them in a little bit of oil. So no different here, but I like about a third into the fat that we separated out. And then I just move them around so that you can be sure that they're completely coated. If you'd like to flip them over, that's fine too, just to make sure that they're nice and evenly coated here. That all looks good. Now we've got our meat that has browned nicely here. The browned meat, to me, is the real trick to great birria. And I'm going to put some of that on each one of these tortillas. Now, the classic accompaniments for this are onions and cilantro. I know that sounds absolutely basic, but I will tell you there is nothing better. But make sure you use a white onion, not a yellow onion for this, because it's going to give you that crisp texture and that really light flavor. Now you could use Mexican hot sauce for this, like Tamasula or Valentina if you want, but a homemade salsa that is made with garlic, roasted garlic especially, and arbol chilies is really my go-to for birria tacos. So I will put a little of that on the top of it. So I'm leaving these on here long enough that I can crisp them lightly underneath. So there should be the right amount of time there. And then just fold them over. And I am going to flip them here so that I can get a little bit more color on them. I'm going to move that one up there. This is looking great. Okay, so you see a little bit of browning coming on these guys here. Yeah, they're beautiful. Just get a light crispness. Now, we're not going for all the way crisp here at all. That also helps when you dunk them into the birria broth. I'll put these guys over here. We have our seasoned broth to serve alongside them. So we'll do that. Of course, you're going to want some limes to go with this because against the richness of that meat, you're going to love having the tanginess of the lime. I always like to put a little bit of finishing salt on these guys right before serving. So a little Malden salt is my choice for that. But any kind of salt, of course, will work. And then the moment has arrived. So you take the little slightly crisping taco. I missed the lime, and I'm not going to miss that here. That's going to be absolutely necessary. So squeeze that over the top. And then dip it in like that. That's heaven.